We are in Psalm chapter 7, and I'm so glad we can journey together. We left off yesterday in verse 6, where David is laying the responsibility of accountability for his enemies, his slanderers, in God's hands. And in chapter 7 and verse 5 and 6, he's saying, God, you lift yourself up. You be glorified. I'm putting this in your hands. I'm trusting you. Look at verse 6. Arise, O Lord, in thine anger. Lift up thyself because of the rage of mine enemies. Turn my enemies' plots, scandals, slander into a platform for your justice, your judgment, your glory. Awake from me to the judgment that thou hast commanded. Now, I left off yesterday asking this. Was this purely a selfish request? Well, look at verse 7. So shall the congregation of the people compass thee about. For their sakes, therefore, return thou on high. Wow. David is praying this prayer not for himself, but for the people he loves, for the people he leads, for the people that he's leading to the Lord. This is what it meant that David was a man after God's own heart. He wanted the people to know God, to worship God, to love God. He wanted their spiritual health and growth and flourishing. He wanted them to be God's people. And he knew his enemies were disruptive of that. He knew that at the core, this was satanic. This was a plot against the will of God, against the decree, the covenant, the appointment, the ordained plan of God for Israel under David's leadership as king, and for this nation to be his people, worshiping, loving, growing, serving, not wholly unlike a healthy church family, okay? I mean, a body of people following the Lord and being led by his shepherding care. This is David's heart. Well, David knows these enemies have invaded his throne or threatened his plan. This would have been likely before he was king, but still disruptive to the forward motion of God's preordained plan. Let me say it this way. David had been, by this point, ordained, anointed to be the next king, but he hadn't been appointed to the throne yet. That was all unfolding. So this was an early disruption to David's forward trajectory and to what he knew would be the way he would lead for the benefit of the people. But I want to just look at verse 7 again more closely. So what he's saying is, God, if you will navigate this, if you'll correct the record, and if you will bring judgment and lift yourself up and be glorified, in not only in this situation, but in a greater comprehensive way, okay? We're still praying this prayer as believers for the world and for time and eternity. God, rise up. Deal with your enemies, bring justice, bring judgment. So there would have been a local, immediate context or contextual application in David's life of why he was writing this psalm. But then for all God followers, really in all time, for all time, there's that comprehensive application that God will rise up and bring judgment and justice, that God will rule, and he will have a congregation of people. You and me will be a part of that. Surrounding him, worshiping him, bowing before him, following him, being cared for and led by him as our good shepherd. So David is praying, and I just love this, so that the congregation of the people will be able to freely compass God about, approach him, worship him, know him, have access to him, for their sakes. Now, there's a gospel application here. Oh my goodness, this is almost, multidimensional here. There's a gospel application, and that is verse 6. If God will arise, pour out his anger on Jesus, who would be lifted up by the rage of his enemies, okay? And if Jesus would face judgment for me, then verse 7, I can be a part of a congregation of people that have free access to God to compass him about. And so David, sees, I think, the gospel here as well. For their sakes, therefore, return now on high. God, right things, make things right for the sake of the people that trust you, believe you, follow you, and want to know you and want to worship you. Wow, what a powerful verse. What a beautiful verse. And I want to just draw out one final application before we wrap up today. And that is, for anyone who's a leader in any context, I think of this in terms of pastors. I think of this in terms of business managers, business owners. I think in terms of parenting, a dad, a mom, a teacher, a classroom. If you have any sphere of influence anywhere, then you can pray a prayer like this. Your heart should lean into the best health and well-being of those you love and lead and influence. And even in your injustice, even in your bearing of a moment of slander or injustice or pain or disruption, you can pray, God, use this in a way that will help others to be more healthy and more flourishing and more freely able to worship you in spirit and in truth. For their sakes, Lord, be glorified. You probably have influence over somebody. Could you pray, God, use my trial to help someone else grow spiritually? That's a powerful prayer. And that's a good way to be a loving influencer. Hey, happy Wednesday. Join us tonight for The Hopeful Life, and I'll see you tomorrow.